All right, well, welcome, everyone. It's great to have everybody here for the first special lecture of the academic year. Really fortunate to have Dr. Jim Willis with us. Jim, as you will hear, will be talking about his experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in Macedonia. But his background is actually pretty interesting. He's got training and experience in counseling, communication, community development, worked for a long time with at-risk youth, was on the faculty at Purdue for a number of years and has been on the adjunct faculty here as well. And it's really interesting to me to see how he brings his wealth of experience with his Peace Corps experience as well. And obviously it's affected him in a way just as he's affected them. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jim Willis.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I start, at the top it says all representations here are my own. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer, not an official of Peace Corps. If you go into the Peace Corps, many Peace Corps volunteers have a blog, and you're obligated in that blog to make that kind of disclosure. So I have no official capacity with the Peace Corps. I'm just a returned Peace Corps volunteer. My name is Jim Willis. There's my email there. If anybody wants to get in contact with me, welcome to do so. I did teach here at ETSU from 2003 until 2010. Finished my coursework at Purdue. Actually worked at Purdue 98. I decided I'd go back and get a doctorate, so I quit my job and went back to school full time and taught classes there while I was doing the coursework. And then I came here to research and write the dissertation. So I was busy while I was here. And I was wondering if there was ever going to be life after dissertation, but it finally got it done. And then it just seemed like it was time to move on and do something else. Just felt like I needed to change. My dissertation is in semiotics. I'm in the communication department, but I'm kind of a hybrid in that department. I got extensive training in Gestalt psychology at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland back in the mid-'80s and up into the '90s. And I found that extremely useful in working with youth at risk because the age range was 15 to 19. For the most part, students didn't have a lot of parenting. They didn't have a lot of money. They were often angry for good reason. So I used Gestalt to develop teams. I called it a community building class. And in Gestalt, we start at the interpsychic level of human system, self-awareness, personal growth kinds of things, meditation. And then we move to interpersonal, and then small subgroups, and then the whole group. And it's all about raising your awareness and staying present so that you can almost sit behind your mind and watch your mind as your mind is making judgments and so forth about who's in the room. And that heightened awareness brings the whole group to a heightened state of awareness. And we'd often be able to sit in groups of 36 for several hours and have a very slow-paced and very intimate, impactful communication. So that's the kind of thing I wanted to transfer into the Peace Corps, just to see if people would be interested. In universities today in the United States, you say Gestalt, and a lot of people go, ooh, get back, what is that? You know? And I understand, sometimes Gestalt doesn't have a lot of interest for people who are involved in a consumer society. Gestalt's about self-empowerment and building a life and not so much about building a career, only but it does give you an advantage to do both. My whole passion in life is experiential education in a classroom. I think that's the very best way to learn. And in my experience, because I like experiential classrooms, I thought of the whole world as a classroom, experiential. So if I wanted to know something, I got to risk my body and throw myself out there and see if I can swim. So that was one of the reasons I went to the Peace Corps. Am I speaking loud enough for everybody? Okay. In the Peace Corps, you got 3 goals. You may already know them. First one, to help the people of interested countries meet their needs for trained men and women. And 2, to help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people served, and to help promote a better understanding on the part of people served by, of other peoples about Americans. So Peace Corps, that's the orbit. Everything orbits around those 3 goals. Right? The first goal is important because a local entity, and we only go where you're invited, a local entity would approach Peace Corps and say, we want to know if we can get a Peace Corps volunteer to come to our elementary school and teach English. So that's a negotiated contract. I went in as a community development volunteer. So I had a contract with the National University Library and the National Museum in Steep. And eventually I had another contract with Domnum Lottie, which was House of Youth. Very interesting place. Now, in addition to your primary goals, every volunteer is expected to develop secondary goals. Primary goals, you're expected to work at least 20 hours a week. And then the secondary goals are things that you decide you would like to do because there's interest or a need in the community, and you are self-initiated. Right? So the purpose of this lecture is to provide general advice to those of you who are enrolled in the ETSU Masters International Program, or more generally, if anyone is interested, to provide a personally relevant description of Peace Corps' experience, so one might find the kind of value that one would find in reading a biography. And the qualifications are: I served in Macedonia as a communication development or community development volunteer from 2013 to 2015. The reason I've divided it between biography and general advice, individuals are so unique, and the assignments in Macedonia or across the Peace Corps assignments are so unique that it's hard to give advice, except in the most general way. I used to think when I was in Macedonia about holding a dandelion that had gone to seed, and they'd blow on it and the seeds would all take off. But every seed was unique and different. And I thought that after we'd been in Macedonia for a while and got our training, and then our group of 36 was dispersed across the whole country. And everybody landed in such different situations. So it's a combination of who you are, and where you land, what the dynamics are in that particular place. Macedonia is so much different than, say, going to Africa. I had running water. I had toilets. I had internet. Macedonia is one of the most wired countries in the Balkans. And that was a project. So some Peace Corps volunteers go, Jim, you were in the plush Corps, not the Peace Corps. But there were some hardships, and I'll point them out. So, structure of this lecture, I'm going to give you a brief description and photos of my experience in Macedonia, a brief description of the work I did. I'm going to run through that fairly quickly, and we're going to get down to number 3, general advice. And I'm framing the general advice in a Gestalt concept called the cycle of experience. So for your purposes, we're going to start with the day we departed and what your experience is like around a 27-month cycle until you leave. And I mean that as a cycle of very subjective experience. And then some personal thoughts and insights that I hope would guide you if you decide that you would want to serve in the Peace Corps. Okay. So part 1, brief description and photos of my experience in Macedonia. This is me in the apple tree of my first homestay father in Probostip, Macedonia. Homestay is a policy of the Peace Corps. When you go in, you must live with a homestay family. When I went in, the policy was that I had to do that. While I was in, they changed the policy back to, okay, you could have your own apartment. And some volunteers did, but I was so in love with my family and so comfortable, I couldn't see any reason to move. Where is Macedonia? I don't know how many times in Macedonia they'd say, Jim, Do people in America even know we exist? Do they know where we are? And they really hope that you do. And we play a big part in their culture. And there are the countries that surround Macedonia. This is Macedonia right here. We got Albania, Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia. So we're landlocked. Macedonia was the most southern state of Yugoslavia when Yugoslavia fell apart and they became an independent nation in 1991. It's the language is Slavic, Macedonian. One thing I would say, they're a fledgling democracy. They're still struggling. A family of 4 lives on about $500 a month. I'll put this map up to give you a kind of picture of the lay of the land. This is steep Macedonia right there. That's where I ended up. We arrived in Skopje off the airplane, and they bused us over here at Tetovo, which is the home of a very popular international ski resort called Popovo-Shapska, if anybody skis. Kumanovo up here is where they had what they called field day training sites. So we arrived in Skopje, took a bus to Tetovo, stayed there for 5 days, and after 5 days, then we dispersed, and I went to Steep. And right around this area were small villages. I was actually in Probu Steep, about 11 miles north of Steep, and there were little villages around there, and they broke up our group of 36 into 4 groups, small groups, and they put you in places where they can manage you. So you can't get in trouble. You don't have a car. They don't know who you are yet, and they're not sure they're going to trust you. And they'll keep you, it's kind of like if you came here as a volunteer, they'd put you in Jonesboro. And then for training days, they'd take you to Greenville because you're not ready for Johnson City yet. And, you know, Peace Corps has been in business since '61, and they've learned a lot from experience. So I've often been amazed about how their policies are the result of bad experiences they've had. And now they know how to manage them. Let me go back here. This down here is Bitola. Bitola is more like a Western European city, a beautiful place. Ohrid right here is where everybody wanted to go, and where a few of them did go. But these 2 lakes here are, some people believe, the oldest lakes in the world. They're 1,000 feet deep. They're absolutely clear. The water runs under these 2 mountains, and you'll see pictures. It's beautiful. That's the jewel of Macedonia right there. This side of Macedonia is Albanian Muslim. It's the smallest minority, or largest minority in the country. And the rest of the country, for the most part, is Orthodox Christian. Although it seems that the young people are more secular and not as involved in religion as has been the history of the country. Gosh, there's so much I'd like to tell you, but these are pictures of Skopje. Skopje is in the north. It's the capital city. There's a lot of discussion about the money that they've been spending to make this city what it looks like today. It's where the money should really go. There's so much need for infrastructure and schools and hospitals and so forth. But the country has made a decision that they were going to use a lot of money to make Skopje a national icon, to present themselves to the world. And it is a beautiful city. It's the statue of Alexander the Great. I mean, that's a huge statue. Just walking around in Skopje. A lot of energy there, a lot of nightlife. It's a nice hopping place to be. This is Bitola in the south, which is more like a Western European city in my experience. This is the main promenade, the center of all the activity in the city. And this is what Oak Ridge looks like, down by the lakes. And Oak Ridge, Macedonia is actually the birthplace of the Cyrillic alphabet. There were people living there around those lakes way, way back. I mean, we're talking BC here. And it's a wonderful place to go. I have a Macedonian who married a friend of mine and moved to the United States back in the 60s and is now just retired and moved back to Oak Ridge. So they've been campaigning that I retire there. And I have to admit, it's starting to look more interesting all the time. Okay, D-Day. If you think about it, I'm 69 years old. Finally got my doctorate at 64. I'm thinking I'm single. I don't like retirement. I'm in good health. What am I going to do? I think I'll go into Peace Corps. And then I thought, do you really want to do that? So I applied, and I spent about $2,500 going through all the medical stuff I needed to do. And at the time, I couldn't request anywhere. I had to say, yeah, I'll go any place you'll send me. So now you're sitting there waiting for a few months, and I'm at my daughter's house, and she's at one end of the table, I'm at the other. We both got our computers up, and up comes this email, and I said, Amanda, I know where I'm going. Where? Macedonia. And I thought, Macedonia, that's near Greece. That's going to be warm. There's going to be palm trees. It's not going to be cold in Macedonia. Boy, was I wrong. It's very cold in Macedonia in the wintertime. So Mandy and Zach took me to Knoxville Airport, and I climbed on a plane, and now I'm in Washington, D.C. And then we arrived at a Washington hotel, and the excitement was just electric. And these young people had come from all over the United States. There were 5 or 6 of us that were the older group. I was the second oldest. There was a man there, 73, and I was 69. We stayed in D.C. for a couple of days for orientation, and then they put us on a bus, and we're headed to the airport. And I really love this photograph because I know all those people, and I can read those faces. And it was like, oh God, we're doing it now. I mean, it was fun. And 16 hours later, with a few stops and layovers, and exhausted, we pulled into the airport in Skopje, Macedonia. And this is a Macedonian woman who is the head of the intensive language and culture training. And she's kind of like the drill sergeant. When she's our drill mother. And she takes care of us and watches over us for 10 weeks. And this young woman is Grace, and Grace was actually a Peace Corps volunteer who was already in Uzbekistan, who came to Macedonia and met us at the airport and became a member of our group. Very interesting woman, very charismatic. Born in South Africa, raised in Japan by her aunt, immigrated to the United States to live with her uncle, multilingual, and got her doctorate degree just after she came back from Macedonia, and she's going to go to work, I believe, for the State Department. But she was born multicultural. I was born in Logansport, Indiana. That was a stretch for me. Once we got to Skopje, they put us on a bus immediately, and they took us to this private high school, which was an Albanian Muslim high school, very upscale, very nice place, very good digs. And they just put us there, I think, to look at us for a while and get to know who we are and see, how everything's copacetic. And then they're going to put us on our buses from here and divide us up and send us out to our individual 4 small village training sites. Okay? A story I guess I'll tell. We had been on the plane, and then we got on a bus and so forth. And as soon as I get to this place and being on the bus, and I'm older, and I just needed to use the restroom. So that was high on my mind. And it's nerve-wracking on a bus when you're older. So we get to this place and we're hustled down into where the cafeteria is in the basement. And the first thing I said is, "Where's the restroom?" And they pointed. So I ran down the hall and I went to the restroom. And then I was looking for, well, how do you flush it? I couldn't find a handle. The first culture shock. And I thought maybe it's a chain. No, no chain. I finally realized later that it was a recessed handle. And it was so invisible, I didn't know it was there. But it was actually a toilet that had been made into a bidet as well, which I'm not used to. So I saw this pipe coming around behind the toilet and going down inside, and there was a little handle on there. So I went, must be it, and I turned the switch, and it blew water all over my legs and soaked me from the knees down. That was my first experience in Macedonia. We got on a bus and ended up in Probostip, and this is a group of homestay parents waiting for their volunteers that they're going to take into their house for 10 weeks. None of us know who they are, and they don't know who we are. And it turns out this big guy right there was Vinci, and he turned out to be my homestay father. And Vinci is a high school music teacher. Okay? And he and his wife had hosted 7 volunteers prior to me. Okay? And the grade school kids came out, and of course, and had a nice program and showed us traditional Macedonian dance. This is Vinci's home, my first homestay family home in Macedonia. The town was about 11,000 people, I would say. Lince was very, very proud of her garden, and Vinci was very, very interested in music. The training, language training, was done here in an elementary school in Probostip, and all the grade school kids were just thrilled to death to have those Americans there. I mean, we were a lot of entertainment for them. And of course, they were a lot of entertainment for us as well. I was out on a break, which I needed because language class was 5 hours a day. We didn't worry about grammar. We had to produce sentences, 5 hours a day. And after an hour, my head locked up. And I'll tell you more about that later. But I was out on a break, and a student came up to me and said, "Vinci," my homestay father is a teacher there, "he wants you in his classroom." So I said, "Okay." Gosh, I wish I could have my break. Okay, well, here we go. So I go up there, and we open the door, and we walk in. And it's like this. It's a big classroom with an open space, and Vinci's sitting over there at the piano, and he said, "Jim, sing us a song." I was like, oh my God. I don't sing all that well. And I thought, what songs do I know? I couldn't think of anything, and all of a sudden I went, "Amazing Grace." And they loved it. And I don't know how many times after that I had to sing that song in public. The school kids liked this. After being a teacher for so long, you know how to relate. This was a little lunch counter place across the street, and I put this up because this is called Shopska salata. And I thought that Caesar salad was unbeatable. But oh my God, that Shopska salata is 10 times better. That is Serenier cheese, which is goat cheese, very finely grated. I haven't been able to find it around here. You're going to get it in Chicago, I guess. English cucumbers, a little onion, and tomatoes. With sunflower seed oil, salt and pepper. Very simple, but oh my God. And that is what you eat when you drink rakia, which I'll show you later. Language training was intense and intense. The elementary school had non-Western toilets. And that was a shock. And the first time I went in there, I looked at that and I thought, I can't do that. And everybody said, oh yeah, eventually you can. There was a Peace Corps volunteer who told me a story that he got up and he thought he had dropped his phone, so he went after it. And it turned out it was his wallet. But after a while I realized that, like they said, that's a better posture than those Western toilets. Those Western toilets give you a hernia. We did have Western toilets in most of our homes, though. And this is the Cyrillic alphabet, and it's a chart with the English pronunciations under each of those letters. So not only did we have to learn a new language, we had to learn to read a new alphabet. Of course, there's a cliche of the cultural metaphor, does a fish know it's in water? And water is so close. I mean, culture is as close as your breath. So it's out of awareness. And I'll tell you, one of the great things about going in the Peace Corps is culture shock, because you become so aware of the water, because you've got a culture that's in contrast with your own. And you're never the same when you come back, because your culture is so visible. I mean, I wore my hat on purpose today, knowing I was violating culture. But then she said I was going to be on TV or on the film, so I thought, well, we'll put a little theater in this anyway. But this is one of the things that you gain from Peace Corps experience that's invaluable, is just breaking your cultural frame and then coming back home. Culture shock. I feel like a little boy pulling a prank, putting that one up. But around Easter, I walked into a butcher shop, and these are lamb's heads. And I put that up there just as an example of, once you get off that airplane, there are so many things that are different that you're in a constant state of shock. This is a culture language school, and our language teacher, Anna. I'm going to have to move quickly to get through all this. This is my homestay father. This is a still. I would say at least maybe a third of the population make their own rakia, which is Macedonian moonshine. It's actually a brandy made from grapes. It's really good stuff. And I would usually have 4 shots a day, at least. 3 shots in a row, and with my body size, and I was drunk. This is Homestay Family in Probesteep, and I wanted to show you this very interesting oven, which is wood-fired. And the top is all cast iron, so you cook on the top, and it also heats the house. There's only got 2 choices for heat in Macedonia. You either burn wood or you use electricity. Electricity is extremely expensive. There are no dryers for the most part. People have washers, but no dryers. Or they wash their clothes after 10 o'clock because the cost of electricity goes down. These are some just pictures of the landscape around Probesteep. If it were darker in here, you'd see that more vividly. But the landscape out there is like nothing I'd ever seen, and the Slavic music feels like the landscape looks. I mean, it's just a soul place. Really grabs you. That's me learning how to use a scythe, and a picture of a Macedonian hammer. At the end of language training, the volunteers cooked Thanksgiving dinner for all of the 9 homestay families. Had a wonderful evening. We made all the food, cooked turkey, and it was the first time I learned to dance the oro. And then the next day we got divided up. So these are pictures of us and where we're going in Macedonia. That's me up there. They thought I was a hippie from the 60s. Actually, I'm not a baby boomer. I'm the last of the previous generation, 44, actually born on D-Day. But you can see how we got scattered. And then we had the swearing in ceremony, where we do like we do in the Army, and we swear. And this gentleman right here is Paul Willis, who was the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Macedonia when I got there. They changed while I was there. Now it's Jess Bailey. Very nice man. And this is Lupcho and Vesna. And I didn't know, all the other Peace Corps volunteers did know, I did not know where I was going to live in Steep. They all knew 2 weeks earlier. So they finally found a place for me, And Lupcho and Vesna actually came to the swearing-in ceremony to let me know I was living with them. And that's the first time I ever met them. This is a picture of Steep. That's basically kind of what my view of the city looked from my front step. And Steep is about 55,000 people. Wonderful history, a lot of medical doctors from there. One of the people that came from Steep was a pioneer in heart surgery. This hill right here is called Esar Hill. We're coming into Steep, and lo and behold, I found out I was going to live on that hill. And I lived facing the town, which is over here, about 3/4 of the way up that hill. And the roads were switchbacks, and we were at the highest level. That's a view of Steep from the top of that hill. And that's a view looking away from Steep. And here we have a little subdivision down there called Novosela, which is an upscale subdivision that was started about 150 years ago. And that's what Novosela looks like at a close-up. There's an ancient fortress on the top of Esar Hill that was built between 1371 and 1395. There's a really nice story I'd like to tell you about that, but we don't have time. This is what downtown Steep looks like. This treatment of the rivers, towns are often on rivers, and all of those stones are done by hand, hammered. No big cement trucks coming in. Everything's mixed in the little cement mixers. Very labor intensive and very high craftsmanship. And an Orthodox church and a Muslim mosque in Steep. This is one of the places I work. This is the National Museum. This is the National University Library. And this is Dom Lomladi House of Youth. This is the home I lived in with Vesna and Lupcho, my second homestay family. I lived in that house for 2 years. And this is the back of the house. You can see the city out there. And we pull up, and you can see it's a little treacherous to get down those steps and around and through. Yeah. This wall right here is actually where you park the car. And you get out of the car and stand on that wall, and it's about maybe 8 feet down. In Macedonia, I found out that, I pulled up here to ETSU campus in a parking lot, and there was a wall around it, and there's a big chain link fence up there, so nobody walks off the place. In Macedonia, that's not the case at all. You'll be in maybe downtown in a park, and the ground will end, and it's 8, 10 feet down, and little kids running around. Nobody ever falls. But we got OSHA, so we make sure things are safe. But my point is, you're expected to pay attention when you get there. Right? And that's part of navigating as well. This is Lupcho, my homestay father, who was an artist and made these iconic butterflies. And this is Vesna, my homestay mother, and her 21-year-old son, 22-year-old son, Victor. Victor now is in Dubai, working in Dubai at Lego theme park. This is a Photoshop picture of my son Victor and his best friend Angel, and they were both guitar players, loved music. Their favorite group was Deep Purple, and they were really fun to be with. This is inside my homestay family's house. This is Victor on the couch. This is Nikki. Nikki's a volunteer from America who was in the same town I was, and it's kind of like being on a ship. You bond, and Peace Corps volunteers become family and support one another. So I was really glad to have Nikki close to where I was living. This is the brother-in-law's house, Melancho, and this is a very stylish, Slavic-looking. Notice the sheep's wool on the chairs. I just really like their style of things. These were my two neighbors. The one on the left is a medical doctor, and so is her mother, and the one on the right is a statistician in a bank in Skopje, and her little daughter, Yasna, who was 6. She stole my heart and used to make me cupcakes. This is the way I walk to work. Not everybody has a car in Macedonia, and for the most part you do walk. It's difficult to use a bicycle because it's so hilly, and I'm not used to those kinds of little narrow streets. You could not drive a car on there. But just walking through it there every day was such a delight, just to walk to work. And I probably walked 10 miles a day. Macedonians are very social, loving people, and lots of parties and lots of rakia. Negoci is what they call it. That's when we're visiting. And here is the university library. In the American Corners is a program that's operated by the State Department. All over Macedonia, and all major libraries have an American Corner to further democracy, teach the value of democracy, rule of law, separation of powers, all of that, and to help students apply for going to school in the United States. Okay. My primary work goals, I'm going to skip over the work part pretty quickly. Those were my primary work goals. And I said I had primary goals. And these are secondary work goals. These are goals that I took my own initiative to start doing. Conversation nights at the American Corner. I'd just go down there and people would come and sit because they wanted to speak English with an American. I started adult development classes in personal growth, self-awareness, group dynamics, community development, argumentation, and public speaking. Tremendous amount of interest. I was really surprised and very pleased about how much interest there is in Eastern Europe with Gestalt psychology. And it's such a small country, if you do something in Steep, by the end of the day, they know about it in Skopje and Ohrid and Bitola. And so I started getting calls to do training in Gestalt development methodology. And then this reboot group was a group in Steep, 15-year-old to 29 years old, high school, university, and university graduates. And I met them at the American Corner, and they wanted to do projects. And I said, why don't I just teach you group development methodology and Gestalt, and we'll start doing projects. Because they were a communist country, now it's a democracy. And I'm saying, you know, if you want to make something happen in a democracy, you got to take the initiative and make it happen. So we started doing projects. And then when I went to Domnum Ladi, they went with me, and we started doing development at Domnum Ladi as well. Two very special people. This is Nicola, the first student that I met. Second day I was in Macedonia, the ambassador was giving a presentation at the library in a room maybe half this size, and somebody asked him a question about the influence of Margaret Thatcher, and he made a statement, and this young man was the only one in the room who would speak up in a room full of adults and contradicted him. So immediately after, I said, hey, I'm a teacher, you look like a good student. So we bonded, and we were very connected over the next 2 years. Nicola. One of the things I did for the library was ride the infobus up into the mountains around Steep called Platskovica. If I understand, if I'm correct about that, they were a group called Urics. They're Muslim and very loyal to Macedonia, and very inward-turned community up into the mountains. Small schoolhouses with wood-burning stoves, and we would bring library books out to them. They were thrilled with the American, I was entertainment for them, and they were just sweet children. They just really stole your heart. They're still bride price in this area. My colleague was wanting to bring 2 young women into Steep and get them enrolled in the university. And that's kind of a no-no in that culture. And so he talked to the father and told me, I told the father, well, think about the bride price. What would she be worth if she had a college degree? So he decided he'd do it. More than one way to skin a cat, I guess. I did a lot of training in Steep in the American Corner. I'm going to skip this work part. This is Abby Nelson, who was a Peace Corps volunteer while I was there. She came in a year after I was there. And I put her up just to honor her. This young woman is fearless. And she did her 27 months in Macedonia, and I think as a teacher. And when her service was over, she traveled by herself, backpacking, staying in hostels for over 7 months through India, all across Southeast Asia, and Thailand, and Myanmar, and ended up in Japan, and then flew from Japan back to Moscow and got on the Siberian Railway and went up into Mongolia and stayed with people in yurts. And there she is, being handled a hawk on her arm. One of the things I say about the Peace Corps, I was so grateful and so ecstatic to have role models who were 50 years younger than me. And also the opportunity to have the kind of relationship with young people that you usually don't get in our culture because, you know, you're the old man and I'm the young kid. But we're bonded, and that was really satisfying and enriching, I hope on both sides. I said Gestalt was a lot of interest in Gestalt, and I did a lot of Gestalt workshops. This is a university near Steep. I was invited to do a workshop there in Gestalt. I said yes. I didn't know at the time it was a private university. Peace Corps volunteers are not supposed to provide services for private businesses. But actually, you know, it does have an effect on the community. I also did not know that there's a partner university with Russia. So when the Peace Corps found out, they asked me, what are you doing there? And I said, well, they asked me, and they said, well, okay. A great experience, though. This is a picture of Reboot Group. We had a lot of fun doing our training, and this is the time when I cooked dinner for all of them. And this is Reboot at Domnum Ladi. This was my boss at Domnum Ladi, the director of Domnum Ladi, and this is the new U.S. Ambassador, Jess Bailey. And then I bought this whiteboard because we didn't have one, and I need a whiteboard. I mean, you can't teach without a whiteboard. And this is mind mapping. So one of the things I was teaching youth in Macedonia was how to mind map everything. If you got a project, you need to mind map it. This is what Domnum Ladi looked like when I first got there. And that history goes way back. It used to be quarters for Yugoslavian officers, but it's got an amphitheater there, and it was also a place for music and dance in the community. And it had, over the time, really run down. Inside was psychedelic. It had been redone inside in psychedelics, and it became ground zero for developing music in the Balkans, cutting edge music and rock in the 90s and into the 2000s. And I had an opportunity to go there one time before they remodeled it, and I was in heaven. It was 1969 all over again. And then the mayor came down and said, we need to do something about this. So they got a grant from a Swiss agency and turned it into this. And after they turned it into this, then I went there to work with them as well. And I may go back there. I am hoping so. This is the amphitheater on the outside around Domnum Ladi, and it's so unique. And this big umbrella, older people would tell me, oh yeah, there's so many people, you know, found their significant other under the umbrella at Domnum Ladi. I mean, it's just part of the culture there. And there's also this big amphitheater around it, and then up on the top, back on this side, there's an outside bar with a big, gigantic tree, and the whole bar's under the leaves of the tree. It's just a magical place. And after I left, they got funding, and were able to get a new umbrella. This is staff of Domnum Ladi, my good friend Tosi right here, who's also an internationally known photographer. This man and this man right here are both internationally known, especially in the Balkans, virtuoso guitarists in rock. That was a very interesting staff to work with. I put this picture, Bushko was a custodian, and this little girl was a neighborhood girl who just hung around. But I put that photograph up to say, if I would say to you, what is a Macedonian like? That's what a Macedonian's like. That picture just melts my heart. And this young woman was a single mother who worked at Dom Lottie. And again, these are neighborhood kids who just hung around every day. This is the Young Men's Leadership Project that we do once a year in Macedonia. There's YMLP for Men and GLOW, Girls Leading Our World. That goes on in another part of the country. But this is a big project every year. And one of the things they do is they bring Macedonian Orthodox or secular youth together with the minority Albanian Muslim populations and build bridges across that division and teach the values of democracy and how democracy works and what you need to do to make it work. My contribution was Gestalt, and also I bought material that you use, gauze, you put in water and make a cast for your arm, put saran wrap over people's faces, paired up, we made masks of one another, and then they painted their own soul masks. And so we're using art to express ourselves. That was a very useful and very enjoyable and dramatic project. Vacations modify experience. I'd been there, I got there in September. I got to my first homestay site and I found out that the country, I'm going to have to move very quickly here. I'll just skip down. This is Oakwood, my second vacation. I'll go back to this one. Yeah. Memorable moment sitting there having my first beer in Macedonia, or in Oakwood. The second vacation was in Greece. I went with 2 young Peace Corps volunteers. Some wonderful stories I wish I had time to tell you. And now we're getting here to close of service. At the end of service, they put us up in this nice hotel in the mountains, and we process the experience together. It's very dramatic and bittersweet. Our last picnic and a farewell dinner, and now we're to part 3, where I can give you some general advice. I'm going to frame the general advice by the concept of the cycle of experience. And in the Gestalt cycle of experience, which is a core part of that, you have sensation, awareness, excitement, action, contact, withdrawal, and closure. You can use that as a micro experience, phenomenological. Like something comes to mind. I'll give you an example. I'm stewing about this lecture, and I'm walking down. I haven't even taken time to eat, and I don't even know I'm hungry, and I smell bread baking. Yeast rolls. Sensations. Yeast roll. Became aware of what that was. I got excited about it, so I went across the street and I bought some and I ate them. And now I'm withdrawing from that experience and closure, and now I'm ready to go on to the next cycle. Or you can apply it to a college year. First day of school, summer's over. Oh my God, campus is just hopping, right? It's just electric. You get into the classroom on the first day of class, you're not going to get anything done. Student 1, 2 things. Orientation. Okay, what are you going to do to me this semester, and when are you going to do it, and who's here? And they want to check each other out. So that's what you give them on the first day of campus. But you can use this as, okay, we're on the bus getting ready to go to Washington, D.C. And we can say this is a 27-month cycle that would describe Peace Corps experience. So, departure, Tedavo for orientation, site training, 10-week intensive. Now we disperse and we all move to our community sites. We're going to be there for 2 years. Most volunteers call that period right there the Dark Ages. And that's the make it or break it time. And I was lucky enough to have a winter break vacation in the Dark Ages, which helped a lot. And then I had my first summer vacation. Once you get a year done, and it seems like all of us said, you got to be here a year in order to get here. You got to experience all the seasons. You got to experience all the holidays. Now you're Macedonian. Then we get into beginning of year 2. Man, does time speed up. When you first get there, you go, oh my God, what did I do to myself? I got here 27 months, and I'm in shock. But then second year, what was shocking before is your normal now. And you know you're going to leave and you don't want to. And then you have your second summer vacation. And then you start to go, oh, I'm getting close. And then you have to close the service. And then you leave. So what are the contours of the Dark Ages? What are the psychological challenges of experience? Feeling alone. Little and less contact with American cohorts and no replacing networks. So are you comfortable in being alone with yourself? One of the questions you would want to ask yourself before you went into the Peace Corps. You're going to feel like a duck out of water. You don't know who you are. You walk out of this room, or you work here, you have titles, people know who you are, you have a role. You're playing this drama and everybody's got your place in it. And you go out to Macedonia, you don't know who's who, where things are, who you are. I mean, it's like there's no walls anywhere. Right? So you feel like a duck out of water. The way to handle that is integration into a new family and community. Culture shock. I showed that picture of the fish in the water. You're actually in new water that doesn't look like the water you were in before, and the fish are different. And private space and time, managing contact and withdrawal. One of the things that the Peace Corps always told Macedonians when we moved in, Americans need private time. So when I would go off myself from some alone time, people would go, what's wrong, Jim? What's wrong? No, nothing's wrong. No, why aren't you? No, nothing's wrong. I just need some alone time. Now, knowing how to get that alone time without offending anybody is also a problem. Let's see. Uncertainty. No habits of being established yet. Lack of structure, coping with the unpredictable. We take so much for granted because it seems like our world is just given. But if I go back to that language school time for 10 weeks, little things like the toilets were different. If you travel, you would never expect that there would be toilet paper somewhere. So you have to carry it with you. I'm making those statements to make the point that being thrown into that different environment, you actually experience a kind of psychological regression. I mean, it pushes you right back into grade school. And we're sitting there in language class in desks that were built for sixth graders. So my knees are on my chin and I'm looking up like this little boy at this beautiful teacher who I have a crush on, and I start acting out and ending all my sentences with por favor. So I want to emphasize that many of the volunteers told me that they shared that same feeling of regressing back into grade school childhood and just managing body functions. Because right now, you wouldn't even think about it. You need to go to the restroom, what's right down the hall? No, you have to plan ahead. You're going to walk into town. Well, if I'm in town in Johnson City, I'll just duck into McDonald's. I don't speak the language. And there's no restrooms in many of these places they're going to let me use. So those kinds of anticipations really force you backwards. On stage all the time. You are representing America. And people are looking at you, making decisions about what an American is. So you're on stage 24/7, and you get no sense of downtime. Recharging. How do you recharge right here in your culture? If you're feeling down, how do you pick yourself up? What do you do to recharge your batteries? Seeking internal supports and external supports. And there's a kind of a sense of urgency. God, I'm just exhausted, and I did all that, but if I were home, I'd do this to support myself, and I can't. And then you get into some self-doubt and questioning about your choice. Did I make the right choice to be here? Can I really do this for 27 months? And then grieving, missing home, If you've ever been really homesick, you know how painful that can be. And then you get sensitive. Smallest things could hurt your feelings. Start taking things very personally. Feeling really fragile. And then boundaries, the lack of, and setting them. How do you set boundaries? If you're at a Macedonian table and you're full and you don't want more of something, and they'll offer it and you say no, they'll put it on your plate anyway. That's the culture. They want you to make sure you're full. So I eventually realized I could play the age card. And when I knew something didn't agree with me or I didn't want, I'd say, you know, I'm an old man and I really have to manage my diet. There's some things I can eat and there's some things I can't. And they, oh, well, okay. And we get along down the pike with that all right. Equivocation, not knowing how and when to say yes or no. In the dark ages, you're in a new place, you don't have any friends, you don't have any network, you're unsure of everything, and every opportunity that somebody, will come to this house, we'll come to this party, we'll go have coffee. You want to say yes, and you're exhausted. Okay? And then unfinished business. If you go into the Peace Corps with some trauma, some unfinished issues, some psychological issues that are unfinished, the dark ages are likely to resurface it. So here's some advice about what to do about it. Boy, we're out of time, aren't we? Knowing where to look. Meditation right here is a thing I would highly recommend for being alone. Duck out of water, regress, remember, be your child again. Everything in this culture is new and novel like you were 3 years old. Culture shock. Become aware of your ethnocentric judging of everything. This isn't the way that's supposed to look. And just let everything be. Private space and time. When you finally do get to bed, which may be late, just savor it. And don't go to sleep right away. Just savor that private time when you can get it. Uncertainty. Discover your ability to attend and stay present, not past or future. The ability to attend, you can strengthen with meditation. So you know, oh, I'm thinking about the past right now, and that's why I'm feeling grief. Or, oh, I'm worried and I'm thinking about the future, and that's creating anxiety. So I can come back to the present moment. On stage, again, say yes, but only temporarily. Recharging, pay very close attention to what you like. Both inside. I did something, I thought something, and made me feel good. Or I found something out there in the community that I really liked. I found the Jazz Art Club. It reminded me of home. So I started having coffee there whenever I felt down. Self-doubt. Have a two-chair conversation with yourself. By that two-chair, I mean, from a Gestalt perspective, everything is about polarity, an attraction and a resistance. Oh, I think I want to go home. Okay, I'll sit in this chair and be the person. Okay, I think I want to go home. And then I'll go over and sit in this chair and respond to myself. No, you don't. And you create a dialogue like that. And what you actually end up doing is integrating the polarities. Okay. Grieving, I think like any other grief process, you just have to allow the natural process of grieving what you're missing, like grandkids and loved ones and my brother. And every time you do grieve, let go each time as you can, but allow it. And don't be afraid of it. Sensitivity, take nothing that happens personally, ever. If you're going out there as a volunteer in a foreign culture, regardless of what happens, if you take it personally, notice that you do and say, I'm not going to do that. Boundaries. Attend in experience to what is me and what is not me. And sensing the boundary between self and other. And Gestalt, the boundary between you and I happens at a contact boundary. So I'm actually thinking, where do I end and you begin? And how do I make contact with you at the boundary? And you have to be able to set boundaries in a new culture. Many of the volunteers, younger volunteers, were not well equipped to set boundaries. And I always recommended that assertive communication training would be very helpful. And I started doing it with many volunteers. So how do you make an assertive statement? When you do this, I feel this way, and could I ask you to do that? And set clear boundaries. All right. And then psychological issues that may resurface. If feel stuck, get professional support, and the Peace Corps provides it. In terms of ruminations and disclosure of private thoughts and revelations, I took this a different way. Private thoughts I had were, 27 months is no small commitment in life. Shall I keep going or for time? If you need to leave, just feel free. Okay. What are the personal costs of going in the Peace Corps for 27 months? What would be the personal costs for you? I have a new great niece. If I go back in the Peace Corps for 27 months, she's going to be 3 years old and I'm going to miss it all. Those kind of things bother me. Are there limits to my commitment? Okay, Peace Corps, I do commit. But does that mean I don't have some limits? So think ahead of time. Yeah, I'll make that commitment. But there would be a point that I wouldn't. And what are your personal boundaries about that? What do I need to commit? What do I need to do to commit? What would you need to do to commit to 27 months in the Peace Corps? Will I injure any significant relationships by leaving? Who's going to feel abandoned if I leave? Will my daughter get upset? Will she think I don't love her enough to stay here? Those kind of thoughts going on. Do I trust myself to leap? Because you are going to step off the cliff and into the unknown. Would I regret not going? That's a good question. I have an attraction to going into the Peace Corps, and I have a resistance to going into the Peace Corps. So I had a two-chair dialogue with myself and came to the conclusion, and I leaped. What are my selfish motives attached to volunteering? Volunteering is supposed to be selfless. But aren't there some selfish motives for being a volunteer? What are those? That's a unique position to be in. My selfish motive was personal growth. I want to test myself at 69 and see if I can grow. How will I manage the inescapable arrogance of presuming I can help? I wondered what you might think about this in a medical school. I mean that from a psychological perspective. But isn't there a certain kind of arrogance in presuming that if you go someplace else to help them, there's some arrogance in that, a kind of one-upsmanship. And you need to be aware of that so you're not condescending, one up, talking down to. The other thing I would say about that is when you get there, you might go, oh my God, why are people doing it this way? There's some wisdom, there's wisdom in the people everywhere you go. So the way things are the way they are for a reason. And before you start to help as a Peace Corps volunteer, you need to know what is. What is the wisdom of the place? And once you understand that is when you're ready to meet them where they are and say, hey, we could do this and it might improve things. All right. What do I believe I'm doing as a Peace Corps volunteer? When you think about leading your life, making choices like this is meaningful in some way. You said you were a church that did mission trips. So people who do mission trips, that has meaning for them in some way, in their frame of their biggest picture of how they make meaning of reality. And I would say before you dive into the Peace Corps, you should give some thought to your biggest picture and ask yourself, what do I think I'm doing when I'm doing this? Private ruminations, I decided not to ruminate in public, but ask you to ruminate. And when I was in Gestalt training, I started painting to represent emotional moments. So I didn't put any words here, I just put paintings and let you reflect on the questions. I took Peace Corps service as a very serious invitation. Peace Corps is an invitation. You apply and you get invited. And it's a big responsibility. So the idea of considering Peace Corps service as a serious invitation. And what are the personal costs? Are there limits to my commitment? I actually ran into a situation where I didn't like where it was going, and I said to the Peace Corps, I know the policy is such and such, but if you require me to do that, it's a deal breaker for me and I'm going home. And they were like, okay, well, let's talk about this. And we worked it out. And I am so glad that I did that. And the outcome of that was so positive. I think I did that because I was older. A lot of the younger volunteers were less willing to go, nope. And that's another reason that I say assertiveness training for volunteers is important. What do I need to do to commit? Will I injure any significant relationships by leaving? Do I trust myself to leap? Would I regret not going? What are my selfish motives for volunteering? That's an example of a soul mask. How will I manage the inescapable arrogance of presuming I can help? What do I believe I'm doing as a Peace Corps volunteer? What is the biggest meaningful picture I can make of reality? And revelations. For me, it all comes down to sandals, walking lovingly in Macedonian shoes. And that statement is the last sentence of a 2-year process of what was that all about? Thank you very much.